The rain-slicked streets of Seattle gleamed under the streetlights. But for Ethan Caldwell, the city's pulse felt like a mockery of his own racing heart. He stood in his corner office, 32 floors above the chaos, staring at the Space Needle's silhouette as his father's voice echoed in his mind. This marriage will secure our legacy. Ethan, an alpha lawyer whose charm and ruthlessness had won countless cases, was now bound to a contract he couldn't argue his way out of an arranged marriage to an Omega he'd never met. The Caldwell family name carried weight in Seattle's elite circles, a dynasty built on law, real estate, and unspoken alpha dominance. Ethan, at 32, had always known his life wasn't entirely his own, but the reality of this arrangement hit like a gavel. His betrothed, Lucas Harper, was a 28-year-old Omega from a lesser-known but respectable family, chosen for reasons Ethan wasn't privy to. He's cold, they say, his mother had warned, her voice laced with pity. But he's an Omega. He'll do his duty. Ethan clenched his jaw, the word duty tasting like ash. He wasn't a romantic, but he'd hoped for more than a transaction. The first meeting was set for a private dinner at Canlis, the city's crown jewel of dining, where power deals were sealed over cedar-planked salmon. Ethan arrived early, his tailored navy suit a stark contrast to the nervous energy coiling in his chest. He adjusted his cufflinks, a gift from his late grandfather, and scanned the room. When Lucas walked in, Ethan's breath caught not from attraction, but from the sheer intensity of the man's presence. Lucas was lean, with sharp cheekbones and auburn hair that fell just shy of his collar. His green eyes, cold as the Puget Sound, met Ethan's with a flicker of defiance before settling into indifference. He wore a simple gray jacket, understated but deliberate, as if daring anyone to underestimate him. "Ethan Caldwell," Ethan said, extending a hand. His alpha instincts flared, urging him to assert control. But Lucas's grip was firm, his expression unyielding. "Lucas Harper," he replied, his voice low, clipped. No warmth, no deference. Just a name, delivered like a challenge. They sat, the air between them thick with unspoken expectations. The waiter poured wine, oblivious to the tension. Ethan tried to break the ice, his lawyer's charm on autopilot. "So, Lucas, what do you do?" "My parents were vague." Lucas's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. "I'm a graphic designer. Freelance. I don't need their approval to live my life." The jab landed, and Ethan's smile tightened. He was used to winning people over, but Lucas wasn't a client to be swayed. The Omega's scent, subtle yet sharp like cedar and rain, stirred something in Ethan, though he pushed it down. This was a contract, not a courtship. Yet, as the dinner wore on, Lucas's guarded answers and fleeting glances revealed cracks in his icy facade, moments of vulnerability that made Ethan wonder what lay beneath. After dinner, they walked to the parking lot, the Seattle mist curling around them. Ethan offered his umbrella, but Lucas declined, letting the rain dampen his hair. "I don't mind getting wet," he said, his tone almost daring Ethan to care. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Ethan felt a spark, not love, not yet, but something raw, unnameable. He drove home that night, his mind replaying Lucas's guarded smile, wondering if this arrangement might unravel him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The weeks that followed were a dance of obligation and curiosity. Ethan's days were consumed by courtrooms and client meetings, but Lucas lingered in his thoughts. Their second meeting, a coffee at a Capitol Hill cafe, was less formal but no less tense. Lucas arrived late, his expression unreadable, sketching in a worn notebook. "You're always working," Ethan noted, nodding at the intricate designs. "It's not work if it's who you are," Lucas shot back, his voice softer this time, almost confessional. Ethan caught a glimpse of passion in his eyes, a fire that contrasted with his cold exterior. He wanted to ask more, to dig deeper. But Lucas closed the notebook and changed the subject. Their families pushed for progress, scheduling dress fittings and venue tours. Ethan's mother insisted on a grand wedding at the Fairmont Olympic, but Lucas's input was minimal. His response is curt. "I don't care about the flowers," he said during one meeting, his tone flat. "Just tell me when to show up." Ethan's frustration grew, but so did his fascination. Lucas wasn't just cold, he was guarded, like a man who'd learned to protect himself from a world that demanded too much. Ethan, who'd spent his life commanding rooms, found himself wanting to crack that armor, to understand the Omega who seemed determined to keep him at arm's length. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, Ethan found himself at Lucas's small apartment in Fremont, delivering wedding documents. The space was cluttered with art supplies, walls covered in sketches of Seattle's skyline. Lucas offered him a beer, a small gesture that felt like a truce. They sat on the balcony, the city lights flickering below. "Why do you do this?" Ethan asked, gesturing to the sketches. "You could have chosen something easier." Lucas stared at the horizon, his voice barely above a whisper. "Art's the only thing that's ever felt like mine." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning Ethan couldn't yet grasp. For the first time, he saw Lucas not as an Omega or a duty, but as a man with dreams, fears, and a past that shaped his walls. As Ethan left that night, Lucas's scent lingered on his jacket, stirring something deep within him. He drove through Seattle's rain-soaked streets, the city's pulse now syncing with his own. This marriage, born of obligation, was starting to feel like something else, something dangerous, something alive. Lucas Harper had always been good at building walls, but Ethan Caldwell was proving to be a relentless force against them. At 28, Lucas had learned to navigate a world that saw Omegas as bargaining chips, their worth tied to biology rather than ambition. Seattle, with its eclectic neighborhoods and gray skies, had been his refuge, a place where he could lose himself in his art and avoid the expectations of his family. But this arranged marriage, a deal struck to secure alliances between the Harpers and Caldwells, threatened to strip away the freedom he'd fought for. The morning after Ethan's visit to his apartment, Lucas sat at his drafting table, sketching furiously. The lines of the Space Needle blurred under his pencil, his thoughts tangled with the Alpha's piercing gaze. Ethan wasn't like the others, arrogant Alphas who saw Omegas as trophies. There was a curiosity in him, a hunger to understand, that made Lucas uneasy. He didn't want to be understood. Understanding led to vulnerability, and vulnerability led to pain. Their next meeting was a wedding planner's nightmare, a venue tour at Chihuly Garden and Glass. Ethan arrived in a crisp blazer, his confidence filling the room like a storm. Lucas, in a worn sweater, felt out of place among the vibrant glass sculptures. The planner droned on about seating arrangements, but Lucas's attention drifted to Ethan, who was studying him instead of the venue. "What?" Lucas snapped, catching Ethan's stare. "Nothing," Ethan said, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Just wondering what you're thinking." "I'm thinking this is a waste of time," Lucas replied, his tone sharper than intended. But Ethan didn't flinch, his eyes holding Lucas's with an intensity that made his chest tighten. For a moment, Lucas wanted to say more, to let something slip, but he bit it back. He wasn't ready to let Ethan in, not yet. As the wedding loomed closer, their interactions grew more frequent, each one a battle between Lucas's defenses and Ethan's persistence. At a suit fitting, Ethan's hand brushed Lucas's as he adjusted a cuff, and the contact sent a jolt through Lucas's body. He pulled away, his face burning, but Ethan's expression was unreadable. "You don't have to do that," Lucas muttered. "Do what?" Ethan asked, his voice low. almost teasing. "Act like you care," Lucas said, his words laced with defiance. But Ethan's silence, paired with a flicker of hurt in his eyes, made Lucas question if he'd misjudged him. The turning point came during a rare moment of solitude. Ethan invited Lucas to a quiet dinner at his waterfront condo, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Lucas expected a power play, but instead, Ethan cooked simple pasta with marinara, the act so domestic it disarmed him. They ate in near silence, the sound of waves filling the gaps. "Why are you doing this?" Lucas finally asked, his fork paused midair. Ethan leaned back, his gaze steady. "Because I want to know you, Lucas. Not the Omega, not the contract. You." The words hit harder than Lucas expected, cracking something in his carefully constructed walls. He didn't respond, but as they cleared the dishes together, their shoulders brushing, Lucas felt a warmth he hadn't allowed himself in years. For the first time, he wondered if Ethan might be more than a duty, if this marriage could be more than a cage. But doubt lingered. Lucas's past, marked by rejection and betrayal, whispered warnings. His first love, an alpha from college, had promised freedom only to abandon him when family pressures mounted. The memory stung, and Lucas couldn't shake the fear that Ethan, with his polished life and powerful family, would eventually do the same. Yet as they stood on the balcony, the city's lights reflecting on the water, Ethan's presence felt like an anchor, steady and unyielding. "I don't trust easily," Lucas admitted, his voice barely audible over the wind. Ethan turned to him, his expression soft but resolute. "Then I'll earn it." The promise hung between them, fragile but real. Lucas didn't know if he could believe it, but for the first time, he wanted to try. As he left Ethan's condo, the Seattle rain felt less like a burden and more like a baptism, washing away the edges of his fear. The marriage was still a contract, but beneath the ink and expectations, something was shifting, something neither of them could ignore. The wedding was 3 weeks away, and Seattle's relentless drizzle mirrored the unease in Lucas's heart. He sat in his Fremont apartment, surrounded by half-finished sketches, his phone buzzing with messages from the wedding planner. Ethan's name popped up to a simple text, "Dinner tomorrow. Just us." Lucas stared at it, his thumb hovering over the reply button. The alpha's persistence was wearing him down, not through force but through quiet, steady presence. It terrified him. Ethan, meanwhile, was unraveling in his own way. In his office, surrounded by case files and mahogany, he couldn't focus. Lucas's guarded eyes haunted him, a puzzle he couldn't solve but couldn't walk away from. He'd always prided himself on control over courtrooms, over his alpha instincts, but Lucas was a variable he hadn't accounted for. The Omega's sharp tongue and fleeting vulnerability stirred something primal in Ethan, a desire that went beyond duty. He wanted to protect Lucas, to know him, to have him, and the intensity of that want scared him. Their dinner was at a small Italian restaurant in Belltown, tucked away from the city's bustle. Lucas arrived first, his sketchbook under his arm, a habit Ethan had come to find endearing. They ordered wine, and for once, the conversation flowed about art, about Seattle's quirks, about anything but the wedding. Lucas laughed at one of Ethan's stories, a rare, unguarded sound that made Ethan's chest ache. "You're not what I expected," Lucas said, his eyes softer than usual. "What did you expect?" Ethan asked, leaning forward. "Another alpha who thinks he owns the world," Lucas said, his honesty cutting. "But you listen." The admission hung between them, and Ethan reached across the table, his hand brushing Lucas's. This time, Lucas didn't pull away. Their fingers lingered, a silent agreement that something was changing. But the moment shattered when Lucas's phone buzzed a call from his mother, reminding him of his place in the marriage. His face hardened, and he excused himself, leaving Ethan alone with the weight of their fragile connection. The next day, Ethan found Lucas at a community art event in Pioneer Square, showcasing local artists. Lucas's work was on display, a series of stark, emotional cityscapes that drew a crowd. Ethan watched from a distance, struck by the raw talent in every stroke. When Lucas noticed him, his expression flickered between surprise and wariness. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. "I wanted to see your world," Ethan replied, his voice earnest. They walked through the exhibit together, Lucas explaining his process with a passion that lit up his face. For the first time, Ethan saw him unguarded, and it was breathtaking. But the night took a darker turn. As they left the gallery, a group of Alpha Protesters and Omega rights activists gathered outside, their voices loud and hateful. Lucas tensed, his shoulders hunching as if bracing for a blow. Ethan stepped closer, his alpha instincts roaring to shield him. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low but firm. One of the protesters, a burly man with a sneer, recognized Ethan from a high-profile case. "Caldwell, slumming it with an Omega," he taunted. Before Ethan could respond, Lucas stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "I'm not your punching bag," he said, his words slicing through the noise. The confrontation ended without violence, but the encounter left Lucas shaken. In the car, Ethan reached for his hand, but Lucas pulled away. "I don't need you to save me," he said, his voice raw. "I've been fighting this my whole life." "I know," Ethan said softly, "but you don't have to fight alone." Lucas didn't respond, but as they drove through the city, he let his hand rest closer to Ethan's, a small gesture that spoke volumes. The wedding was approaching, but so was something deeper, a connection forged in shared moments, tested by the world's cruelty. Ethan knew he was falling, and Lucas, despite his walls, was starting to let himself feel it too. The Seattle sky was a bruise of gray and purple as Lucas stood on the balcony of Ethan's condo, the wedding now just 10 days away. The city hummed below, oblivious to the storm in his chest. He'd spent years guarding his heart, but Ethan's steady presence was like a tide eroding his defenses. Last night's confrontation at the gallery had shaken him not because of the protesters, but because of Ethan's instinct to protect him. It felt too good, too dangerous. Ethan watched Lucas from the doorway, a glass of bourbon in hand. He'd seen the Omega's strength, his fire, but also the weight he carried. Ethan wanted to carry it with him, but Lucas's independence was a wall he couldn't breach with force. "You okay?" Ethan asked, stepping closer. Lucas didn't turn, his voice barely audible. "I don't know how to do this, Ethan. Trusting someone, it's not me." Ethan set the glass down and joined him at the railing. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said, his tone soft but resolute. Lucas glanced at him, his green eyes searching for a lie. He found none. The days blurred with wedding preparations, each moment pulling them closer. At a cake tasting, Lucas surprised Ethan by laughing at a too-sweet frosting, his guard slipping in the mundane. Ethan caught himself staring, memorizing the way Lucas's eyes crinkled. But the ease was fleeting. At a family dinner, Lucas's father made a cutting remark about Omegas knowing their place, and Lucas's face shut down, his silence louder than any retort. Ethan confronted him later, outside the restaurant. "Why do you let him talk to you like that?" he asked, frustration seeping through. "Because fighting changes nothing," Lucas snapped, his voice breaking. "You think I haven't tried? They'll never see me as more than an Omega." "Then let me see you," Ethan said, stepping closer. "All of you." Lucas's breath hitched, and for a moment, he leaned into Ethan's warmth before pulling back. "You don't know what you're asking," he whispered. But Ethan did. He was asking for everything: Lucas's trust, his heart, his future. The realization hit him as they stood in the rain, the city's pulse matching their own. He was falling in love, not with the idea of Lucas, but with the man himself, flawed, fierce, and fiercely independent. The next day, Ethan took a risk. He invited Lucas to a quiet hike in the Olympic National Forest, away from the wedding chaos. The forest was alive with the scent of pine and earth, and for once, Lucas seemed at ease. They walked in companionable silence, the tension between them softening. At a clearing overlooking a misty valley, Lucas stopped, his sketchbook open. "This is why I draw," he said, his voice soft. "It's the only way I can make sense of the world." Ethan watched him sketch, the lines capturing the valley's raw beauty. "You're incredible," he said, the words slipping out. Lucas froze, then met his gaze, his expression a mix of fear and longing. "Don't say things you don't mean," Lucas said, but his voice lacked its usual edge. "I mean it," Ethan replied, stepping closer. Their hands brushed, and this time, Lucas didn't pull away. The moment stretched, fragile and electric, until Lucas leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like a confession. It was tentative at first, then desperate, years of restraint unraveling in seconds. When they pulled apart, Lucas's eyes were wet, but he smiled a real, unguarded smile. "This doesn't change anything," he said, but his tone betrayed him. "It changes everything," Ethan whispered, and for the first time, Lucas didn't argue. The kiss in the forest lingered in Lucas's mind like a melody he couldn't shake. For days, he replayed Ethan's warmth, the way his hands had steadied him, the promise in his eyes. But with the wedding 5 days away, doubt crept back in. Lucas had spent so long protecting himself, and now he was teetering on the edge of surrender. What if Ethan's affection was just another obligation, a performance for the sake of their families? Ethan felt the shift too. Lucas was pulling back, his text shorter, his eyes guarded again. At a final venue walkthrough, Lucas barely spoke, his attention fixed on the ornate chandeliers of the Fairmont Olympic. Ethan wanted to reach for him, to bridge the gap, but the weight of their family's expectations hung heavy. His mother cornered him after, her voice low. "Don't get too attached, Ethan. He's an Omega. He'll do what's expected." The words stung, but they fueled Ethan's resolve. He wasn't marrying Lucas for duty anymore, was marrying him for himself. That night, he drove to Lucas's apartment, uninvited, his heart pounding. Lucas opened the door, his expression wary. "What do you want, Ethan?" "You," Ethan said, the word raw and unfiltered. "I want you, Lucas. Not the contract, not the Omega. You." Lucas's breath caught, his walls crumbling under the weight of Ethan's honesty. He stepped aside, letting Ethan in. They sat on the couch, the space between them charged with unspoken words. "I'm scared," Lucas admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Everyone I've trusted has hurt me." "Then let me be different," Ethan said, his hand finding Lucas's. "Let me try." They talked for hours, the city's hum fading into the background. Lucas shared pieces of his past, his mother's disapproval, his father's indifference, the alpha who'd left him broken. Ethan listened, his anger at the world's cruelty mixing with awe at Lucas's resilience. When Lucas finally fell silent, Ethan pulled him close, their foreheads touching. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. The days before the wedding were a whirlwind of rehearsals and family demands. But Ethan and Lucas carved out moments for themselves. A late-night coffee run, a stolen kiss in a hotel hallway, a shared laugh over a poorly worded invitation. Each moment stitched them closer, their bond growing stronger than the contract that had brought them together. But the night before the wedding, Lucas's fears resurfaced. Alone in his apartment, he stared at his suit, the weight of tomorrow pressing down. What if this was a mistake? What if Ethan changed? Like the others? He almost called it off, his finger hovering over Ethan's number. But a knock at the door stopped him. Ethan stood there, rain-soaked and resolute. "I know you're scared," he said before Lucas could speak. "So am I. But I'm all in." "Lucas, are you?" Lucas's throat tightened, tears prickling his eyes. He nodded, unable to find words, and pulled Ethan into a fierce embrace. The rain outside fell harder, but inside, something new was taking root. A love born not of duty, but of choice. The wedding day dawned with a rare Seattle sunrise, the sky a canvas of gold and pink. Ethan stood in the Fairmont Olympics grand ballroom, his heart a mix of nerves and certainty. The room was a spectacle of white roses and crystal, but his eyes were on the doors, waiting for Lucas. He'd spent the morning replaying their journey, the cold first meeting, the tentative kisses, the nights where words had built a bridge between them. This wasn't just a marriage anymore. It was a promise. Lucas, in a small dressing room, adjusted his tie with trembling hands. The mirror reflected a man he barely recognized, sharp in a tailored suit, but vulnerable in ways he hadn't allowed himself to be in years. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, warning him to behave. But Ethan's words drowned her out. "I want you." For the first time, Lucas believed it. The ceremony was a blur of vows and applause. But the moment Lucas walked down the aisle, time slowed. Their eyes locked, and Ethan's smile was a lifeline, pulling Lucas through his fear. They spoke their vows, each word heavy with meaning only they understood. When Ethan slipped the ring onto Lucas's finger, his touch lingered, a silent vow of his own. The reception was a whirlwind of toasts and dancing, but Ethan and Lucas stole moments alone, a quiet corner, a shared glance, a hand on the small of Lucas's back. As they danced, Lucas rested his head against Ethan's chest, the alpha's heartbeat steadying him. "I didn't think I could do this," Lucas whispered. "You did," Ethan murmured, his lips brushing Lucas's temple. "And we're just getting started." But the night wasn't without tension. Lucas's father approached, his expression cold. "Don't forget your place," he said, his voice low but cutting. Lucas tensed, but Ethan's hand tightened on his, grounding him. "He knows his place," Ethan said, his tone calm but steel-edged. "With me." The words were a declaration, and Lucas felt a weight lift. For the first time, he wasn't alone in the fight. As they left the reception, hand in hand, Seattle's lights welcomed them into a new chapter. The marriage had begun as a contract, but it was now a bond forged in trust, sealed with love. The honeymoon was a quiet escape to a cabin in the San Juan Islands, a world away from Seattle's demands. The salty air and crashing waves gave Lucas space to breathe, to let himself feel the weight of his new reality. Ethan was his husband now, not just an alpha, not just a name on a contract, but the man who'd seen through his walls and stayed. They spent their days hiking, cooking, and talking, each moment deepening their bond. One night, under a blanket of stars, Lucas opened up about his fears, his worry that he'd never be enough, that Ethan would tire of him. Ethan listened, then pulled him close. "You're more than enough," he said, his voice fierce. "You're everything." The words broke something in Lucas, and he kissed Ethan with a desperation that spoke of years of holding back. They made love under the stars, the act raw and honest, a culmination of their journey from strangers to partners. For Lucas, it was a surrender not to Ethan's alpha status, but to the love they'd built together. Back in Seattle, reality waited. Ethan returned to his law firm, where whispers of his Omega marriage stirred judgment. Lucas faced his own battles, clients who questioned his professionalism, family members who dismissed his art. But they faced them together. Their home a sanctuary where they could be themselves. Lucas's sketches began to reflect their life. Ethan's smile, their shared coffee mugs, the view from their balcony. One evening, Lucas surprised Ethan with a gift, a framed sketch of their first kiss in the forest, the lines capturing every emotion. Ethan's eyes welled up, and he pulled Lucas into a hug. "I love you," he said, the words simple but seismic. "I love you too," Lucas replied, the admission freeing him in ways he hadn't thought possible. Months passed, and Ethan and Lucas settled into a life that was theirs, not their families. Seattle became their canvas, its streets and skies a backdrop to their love. They fought. Of course, Lucas's stubbornness clashed with Ethan's protectiveness, but each argument ended with understanding, their bond stronger for it. One spring evening, they hosted a small art show in their home, showcasing Lucas's work. Friends, colleagues, and even a few hesitant family members filled the space, their laughter mingling with the scent of cedar and wine. Lucas's latest piece, a vibrant cityscape titled Home, hung in the center, a love letter to Ethan and the life they'd built. As the night wound down, Ethan found Lucas on the balcony, staring at the city. "What are you thinking?" he asked, echoing their first meeting. Lucas smiled, his hand finding Ethan's. "That I'm glad I said yes." The journey hadn't been easy. The world still judged, still demanded they fit into boxes: alpha, omega, husband, artist. But together, they'd rewritten the rules, carving out a space where love was enough. Seattle's rain fell softly, a reminder of the city that had witnessed their transformation. They stood together, no longer bound by duty, but by a desire that had struck like lightning and stayed like a heartbeat. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, raw, real, and fiercely human. And in the heart of Seattle, under a sky that never stopped dreaming, Ethan and Lucas knew they'd found something worth fighting for: each other.